The floor is yours.
Ms. Pradel, thank you. Thank you very much for your kind words. And also, Mr. Ashwani, what you've just said is great for me because it really helps to pinpoint positivity, which is what we really need. Thank you also, Giju and Rohit, for your support in the pulling all this together. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome. I'm coming today out of Lisbon, Portugal. And as was saying just before, my last international stamp was leaving Hyderabad. So India is very close to my heart. You were my last departure before lockdown in March 2020. I was attending Wings India down in Hyderabad. And obviously we didn't know then what we know now. And as Mr. Ashwani mentioned, let's go back to September the 11th. I was in BA. I was in a meeting in Glasgow. And as you remember, this was a early morning in New York, which was lunchtime-ish in the United Kingdom. And I took a plane from Glasgow down to Heathrow, landed at Heathrow and saw in those days, the only airlines flying between London and JFK was BA, American Airlines. And everything was parked up and people felt that this was the end of aviation. We lost about 1% of capacity during that, let's call it crisis. We rebuilt and we went stronger. The challenge with this pandemic, as was basically said in the introduction, is that it hit us in a completely different way. It really hit everybody that was traveling, not certain markets. And that's something that it's been more difficult to understand. So what I'd like to do this morning is basically share with you some key areas of why this is now a good time for airports, communities, which includes tourism boards, chambers of commerce, government officials, to really engage with aviation. This is the time that airlines are through their restructuring. In most cases, most airlines now have made their visions. They understand where they were in 19. They took the years of 20 to understand where they may be. Of course, this is an evolving change, and the way that airlines are planning is completely different to what it was back in 2019. 2-week roll periods of flights is not something that we've ever understood. And how, as airports, can you work with that? But what we'd like to do is I will share some slides with you, some ideas, there's some polls. Giju will be taking any questions that you have, and then we'll pass them on to me. And actually, if you really want to open and speak, and there are time, then we can look at that also. So let's try to make this as interactive as we can. I'll start to give a little bit about where are we in terms of our industry. So let me bring up our first poll, as I will call it. So we're going to ask you a small question built upon what we've just said. How do you see the next few years? Do you believe that 2024 is the Holy Grail? Do you believe that by then we will be back to the levels of 2019? Do you believe we can get quicker? Some people say 23, maybe 22 is too fast, or good luck. This is going on for many more years. Just give you another couple of more seconds to see where you feel. So are we bang on 23? Are we picking 24, or are we going more thinking that we're not through the end of this yet? So I will now end the poll and share the results. So obviously what you can see here is 66% of you believe that we will be back before what I are to predict, which is very positive. So thank you very much for also joining this belief that together we can get through this. 21% of you are sticking with the Holy Grail, that this takes a little bit, we can't just fix it immediately. But 13% of you are starting to, I wouldn't say be pessimistic, because we just don't know, but are seeing something that is not making you feel confident that we've turned the corner. So I need to try to obviously support the 66% and try to show you the 13% that actually we can get through this a little bit quicker. So let me try to bring up that to support where we can go next. Giju, can you just help me to remove the poll? The poll is now removed.
I think it's removed. The poll is removed now.
Okay, thank you.
I can see it.
Yes, I'm still seeing it as well. So I think it may be just...
You can cross it. You can close it.
Okay, let me try to... Okay. Just bear with me 1 second. Yes, there we go. Okay, so thank you very much. How is it at the moment? Let's try to understand a little bit about what are we seeing in the global. So by the end of 2020, we talked around somewhere between, if it's Cirium, IATA, they're saying somewhere between 52 to 57% of capacity was taken out during the year 20 when we look back at 2019. So we don't need to dwell on that. When we said we lost 1 or 2% with September the 11th, this was fundamental. So, that never happened. Hopefully it will never happen again, but it's the reality. So what we can show here is that, yes, we saw what happened and what's happening next. I think this is where opportunities can lie. If we take the position at the start of this year, so the start of 2021 through to August, we're seeing around 36% down on 2019. So we've been able to recover, let's be honest, we've recovered significantly from the lows back in 2020. But the reality is, how do we now shift this and take it further? If we look at what's been going on, obviously, why are we saying that it's quite positive now in the summer? Two of the biggest markets during the summer periods would be the European market and the United States. What we're seeing there, obviously in the Europeans market, we've seen about 20, maybe something about 30% of recovery in June and up to nearly 60% in July and August. Why? Because obviously airlines have put a lot of capacity into the peak summer, believing that people will take summer vacations. The challenge at the moment is that that's not happening as fast as the capacity is been putting in. So remember, what we're looking at here is capacity. This is not load factors. So theoretically, the airlines are doing their job. They're trying to rebuild their structures. They're trying to put the capacity back in, hoping that the demand will follow. In the US, they've been able to get up to about 80% of recovery during 2021. So significant domestic, and you've probably been seeing that, and somewhere in the region of 185 new domestic routes were launched at the start of the summer. We had 2 new airlines launch in the United States, Avalon out of Burbank Airport over in Los Angeles, and Breeze, which was the former CEO of JetBlue, created an airline which was looking at new point-to-point projects. So two growth airlines in the US, plus Frontier and Allegiant put in a huge amount of capacity. So what Cirium are showing here is that the capacity by the end of August is the best we've had for some time, which is where we hope to bring that optimism that have we started to turn the corner? Have we been able to make a difference? And if you mirror that then with the amount of planes that have been taken out of service, if we go to the worst scenario, which was at the start of 2020, where we had nearly over 14,000 aircrafts in storage. If we mirror that on now to the end of July, the last data, we're talking around just, somewhere in the less than 6,000 planes in storage. And just since February, 2,500 new planes have come back into service. So the question now is, how are we trying to attract flights back? Is this flights coming back to recover routes that were already positioned, or are airlines using this opportunity to reposition new flights? And this is what we're going to try to discuss during this session this morning. Do we try to retain existing, as an airport and the tourism and the community, do we try to retain the routes that we had in 2019, or do we use the opportunity to look at thinking forward and offering new opportunities? Because whilst some countries are open and some countries aren't, airlines have been very pragmatic in where they've started to look at opportunities. What we've come up with is a new route, or a new word, route experimentation. Airlines were very reluctant to try routes in the past. Mr. Ashwani was saying that San Francisco was done overnight. It's not normal for airlines to be planning such quick opportunities. But let's be honest, I think what airlines have been able to do is move their aircraft where business has been made available. And I think where the US has been the kind of the bellwether, if we look back to April and May, the fastest growing airports in the world, and let's say, the common denominator here was very low, because you think about the big source markets of China, India. You were at your worst wave of COVID. China hasn't really been able to internationalize either. What we had here was a significant experiment of flights moving away from the major hubs in the US. So rather than Delta focusing on Atlanta and everything touching Atlanta, or United, everything touching Chicago, or American, everything touching Dallas, they started to look completely different. They started to do flights point to point, because what they were realizing is that the traffic was very much aimed at leisure. Some of the fastest growing airports were in Montana and Wyoming, states in the US that have nothing. Very open, it's where we call it big sky country. Montana and Wyoming, it's where you have a lot of the national parks. And the amount of travel that was going into an airport called Bozeman Airport. Bozeman Airport was the fastest growing airport in the world a few months ago. Not Dubai, not London, not Los Angeles, which you would have normally been associated with hubs, because airlines were trying. If we look at Europe, Europe wasn't really open to the American market a few months ago. Croatia took a little bit of leap of faith and said that we will bet on Americans coming into Europe with vaccinations. Dubrovnik Airport had never had direct flights from the United States. In the space of a week, both Delta and American started connecting into Croatia, into Dubrovnik, because they had aircraft sat on the ground. There was a little bit of demand to want to go to Europe. And so all of a sudden, airlines were doing what Mr. Arani was mentioning. Overnight, planes were flying from JFK to Dubrovnik. They'd never done that. So this is a huge opportunity for airports with their communities to not sit back and wait, but to positively start looking for these opportunities. The question at the moment, and this is one of the biggest, if we move into how our airports working with airlines, we have opportunities. Capacity is coming back, as I've shown you. But if we look here, what we're seeing is a little bit of less usage of aircraft, what we call contribution per block hour, the CPBH from airlines. On the green line, looking at the twin aisles, we've dropped probably from around 13 hours of flying a day to 10 and a half. So yes, a lot of the international flights have not been operating because we've had conditions of closing of borders. So it's been very hard for some of the traditional airlines to be able to rebuild back their strategies on the basis that countries haven't been opened. So a lot of that long-haul fleet, twin aisle fleet, was switched into cargo. At some point that will come back. And how can we try to rebuild back the long-haul markets? Of course, what was on that long-haul markets might have been a lot of corporate travel. Is corporate travel coming back as fast as leisure travel? For sure at the moment, no. Leisure travel is booming. Corporate travel, it's wait and see. We'll pick that back up, and that might be something you want to raise as a question. If we drop down and look at the kind of the red line and look at the single aisle and associate that more with the A320, 737 families of aircraft, etc. Here we've dropped less, 9.5 hours daily flying to around 8 hours. Why? Because a lot of the low-cost airlines, and if you think here in Europe, Ryanair, EasyJet, and Wizz have used this pandemic to exponentially grow. So they've been flying a lot of operations. If you look at the US, I've mentioned already Frontier and Allegiant, two big users of single aisle aircraft, have developed massive domestic strategies in the US. And if you look at your market, obviously with Indigo, Spice, again, single aisle has been their focus. The question at the moment is, can the low cost get a quick sector, another round trip sector back in to fill that couple of hours of underutilized contribution per block hour? If they can, that will be really beneficial. Of course, for an airline to do another sector, we need to create the right demand, and we need to understand where that is at the moment. So the supply side is looking okay. Being honest, airlines are working the best they can to put their capacity back. And for airports on this masterclass today, this is your time to be really starting to think about experimenting. What can you offer airlines to get them to think quickly about something that they have not been doing? The fleets are changing. So what we're noticing, yes, we've seen some of the wide bodies leaving. So the A380 concept has started to see some change. The A340-600s have started to be removed a little bit out of the system. So it's very much looking at more fuel efficient A330, A350 projects. And obviously on the single aisle, it's really been the driver of the MAX coming back, and those airlines that were with big orders of the MAX, and of course increasing on the A320. What will really be a game changer, and we'll come on to this a little bit later, is what is happening with the Airbus 21 long range and ultra long range projects. In India, yet it's not really happening. This is really a project that started in Europe and the United States. So trying to connect 7 to 9 hours of flying with a single aisle aircraft. So we're now looking at connecting East Coast USA and East Canada over to Europe, to West Europe. So Europe being then Scotland, England, France, Spain, Portugal, etc., bringing across 200-seat single aisle aircraft, which allow airlines to be very opportunistic in looking at secondary cities in Europe. This is a wonderful project we'll come back on. So on the supply side, great opportunities. How's the demand looking? Because obviously one side of an airline is what have we done with our seats? The other side is, are we making any money? Unfortunately, making money is not the word that airlines are saying at the moment. Looking here at yields being the amount that we can get per seat, and we look here at the blue bar graphs first, which is the United States domestic market. Second quarter being April, May, June, they were at about 32% down on the yield. That meant American airline companies were putting in a lot of capacity, as I've shown you, but they're not making money. They're throwing in capacity, reducing fare, hoping that people will travel. That is obviously a short-term project. That is not something that you would think about building up. We're not here to fly people cheap. We're here to make money. So the problem at the moment for airlines is that, yes, we've got capacity, but we're actually flying where we lose money. And that has to change. The green is Europe, the same situation. We've seen around 15% yield drop in the second quarter. What's really worrying here for the summer period for European airline companies is during June, July, August, which is the core months to make money, we're running at about minus 25% on the yield. Never mind the load factor, which is normally around 20 percentage points below capacity. You're not only flying less people, but you're flying less people with less revenue. So you can see from an airline's point of view, we've not got through this. Capacity is one side of the story, the demand is the other side. Hopefully, where you've got Asia Pacific being a little bit more bullish on its yields because they're not open. So if you have to travel, obviously airlines can yield much better when you've got restrictions. When you're working in a more open space, which is what North America now is and what Europe is in terms of opening their borders, etc., you're using price as a stimulation to support all of that capacity that you put back in. Because in a lot of cases, airlines haven't reduced capacity as much as the fall in the demand during the pandemic. If we look at what was taken out of the system, I've shown you in the amount of planes that have been stored. We were storing 12,000 planes at the worst of the pandemic. We're now storing less than 3,000. So you can see there's a significant amount of aircraft that are still available. There hasn't been a huge takeout, probably around 5 to 10% of fleet has been taken out completely. If that is airlines removing their A380, removing their A340s, but in relation to what is real capacity, there's a significant amount that's there. So from the airport and the community's point of view, it's there for the taking. How the airlines will then work with you, that's going to be another question, because yields are a worry. If we mirror that, and I'm looking here at Ryanair, which is Europe's largest airline, if we look at the summer months, the orange line is what their yield is now for the peak summer, and you look at the 2020 and 2019, you're looking at somewhere between 55 euros average compared to 75 euros average. So they're losing around 20 euros per yield on a seat compared to what they were getting in the previous summers. At the same time that they're losing money on their seats, this is their seat capacity during the same periods. If you look at where I've circled in red, their capacity in the summer, it's a couple of million less than it was in the peak months of 2019. So you're flying nearly the same amount with 20% less on your yield. So you can see straight away, it's not easy at the moment for airlines to experiment. It's not easy for airlines to think about new routes. But what they're trying to do is look for opportunities. Where can they reactivate that capacity and move it around and hopefully chase the demand? We've never thought like this. We've created supply. We've put supply in, we've talked to the airports, and we've tried to understand where can we put my supply? And what we're now trying to understand is how do we shift that mindset? Where can we look for opportunities on the demand side and move the hardware to support the movements of demand? Hence why we had Wyoming and Montana as the fastest growing states of travel in the US, and not Los Angeles or New York, which is where you would normally be seeing movement. So this is the kind of the background to the situation. It's growing, but we've got some pressures on price, which means airlines are going to be more and more trying to think, how can I take that risk of opening routes into your airport? But more importantly, how can we share that risk? And that's something that we'll get onto and talk more. So what is air services? Why should I fly to your airport? Or how is an airport? Old practices have gone, let's be honest. In the olden days, we planned 1 year in advance. So we were now starting to think about summer 22. We've not yet finished the summer planning of 21. And if you look at airline schedules for the winter, yes, of course, there are schedules on the systems because, of course, people are making bookings. But the winter schedule is not finished. In some cases, it's not even really started. There are holding flights from winter 19 that we've just taken over to winter 21, 22. But we've not really started to look at what is winter. It's now. So we're talking about winter IATA starting at the end of October. We're now early August. So you can see the window has gone from 1 year to 2.5 months. And in some cases, airlines are working on a 15-day cycle of route development. So is this the norms? Is this good for airlines to change their planning? Airports, how do you work with this? How do you have your schedules in place with your ground handling partners to work within 15-day windows of route development? You know, the project of aviation and this ecosystem of aviation is changing. Digitalization on the demand side is allowing people to book in multiple channels. The way that we've used the digitalization through booking, through social, etc. People's ability to travel is tomorrow. But the airline's ability to place aircraft for tomorrow was not there. So if we think about it, in all of the negativity of the pandemic, from a route development point of view, this has actually given us opportunities. Why are we planning next year when we really should be planning much more month on month and picking up on these trends, using the digitalization to show what is happening? Why was Wyoming and Montana, why did Delta and American move from their hub strategy to a point-to-point strategy? Because they were working with Google and they were looking at where people were searching. Where were people wanting to travel to? And they weren't seeing LA. They weren't seeing New York. They were seeing the national parks of Wyoming. They were looking at the glacier parks. People wanted to travel to remote areas. So all of a sudden, searches were not tying in with flight schedules. So the power of working in an ecosystem of supply and demand being more aligned, surely that's an opportunity from this pandemic to pick that up. And we'll bring that through when we look at the situation. So, Ijo, to me to take a rest before I look a little bit about India. Any interesting questions that you need to throw back at me? Has anybody raised anything that you'd like me to answer before I move on?
So I've just typed in the chat box. People, you're free to ask questions if there is anything before we move. Okay.
So where were you? And I think Mr. Ashwani gave a very interesting picture. You know, India. I know not everybody on this webinar is Indian related, but as GMR is our host, I thought I'd make a little bit of time just to look at India and see where that is in the bigger picture. So I think if we look at the situation in the last 10 years up to the pandemic, yes, India was in the world was looking. The world wanted to know what was going on. You were the bellwether of what is happening. 250 million seats, as was said, 18% growth. You had aviation growth was faster than your GDP, and you were one of the bellwethers of GDP. So India was on the touch. Everybody was starting to think, what's going on? What's happening? And what you started to see here was, interestingly, domestic had become the driver. 10 years, seat growth was 3 times international. Why? Because you started to move people around the country. As was said, trains were not as good as aviation. Aviation came into the market. Low-cost developments, you mirrored what had happened in Europe and the US. The model has switched across the world. If we look at low-cost were developed in the US in the 70s with Southwest Airlines. Southwest Airlines were the pioneers created in Dallas. They changed the way people flew. That was mirrored into Europe with Ryanair and then EasyJet. And then if you think about it, it's moved across to Asia. India with, as it was said today, 15 years that Indigo was created. AirAsia out of Malaysia, and obviously Spring Airlines in China. So you've kind of been, you're in the third wave of low-cost development. So you should have learned from the first wave and the second wave. And obviously what you're able to do is, because of the size of the country and the population of the country, you were able to really focus on that domestic push. The challenge that created, coming back to what we're showing with the situation, is that you made it very price sensitive. So from an airport's point of view, you're taking a lot of your slots with very low yielding routes. So as an airport operator, I'm not getting the revenue generation that I would like from the long-haul wide-body projects because I'm tying up a lot of my capacity in the airport with short-haul, low-cost strategy. So you can see straight away from an airport's point of view, the domestic is good to feed the airport, but you're using a lot of your capacity to work with low-yielding markets. And what's now happened is the domestic driver has become very strong, and the airlines have very much used domestic as their differentiation. So 80% of the seats on the domestic market pre-COVID were basically with three airlines. Four airlines, if you look also there with AirAsia, India, Go, SpiceJet, and Indigo. So 4 airlines were driving 80% of your domestic capacity with very little differentiation between the 4 carriers. That goes back to the first point here, is price sensitive with low margins. And I don't see a lot of those airlines putting out profit statements. So the question from the learning from the European and the US point of view is, how do you change the model? How do you rebuild the low cost? What we saw last week, and this will be a really interesting way to think, what is this new airline that's going to be created, this new Akasa Air? It's got experts coming from Go. It's got experts coming from Indigo. So you've got a board of directors that have come from the people that created the 4 airlines that drive 80% of the low-cost strategy within the domestic market of India. How is Akasa going to differentiate from the other 4? Good question to ask. And how are you airports going to look at this as a new opportunity? This is a new player in the market, or is it the same as the other airlines that are already serving my airports? So things as we move forward. But generally, before we go back into the picture, yes, double the GDP. New airports in the pipeline. I think, what we're looking at here is somewhere in, the 3rd largest market by 2024, 4 times the growth in planes, 100 new airports by 2024. These are bold statements that come from the government. And it's being backed up by the ability to get this flying. You've got this UDAN program, which works very well. But again, UDAN is all about supporting domestic, getting more unserved markets within the project. Will we get consolidation? You're getting new airlines. Akasa's coming in. It's not consolidation. It's a new player. What about the other 4? Do you see any opportunities to merge? What would that then do to the landscape? Why did I look back at, why was I in Hyderabad? I wanted to know what was going on, the same as most people who didn't really study India. When you talk about your middle class is, let's go back to the end of 2019. I was in Beijing I put on a conference in Beijing about the China outbound strategy. China outbound had gone to 800 million tourists at the end of 2019. The world was looking at China when it came to tourism. Now, out of that 800 million, a significant amount of that went to the 3, what they call Macau, Hong Kong and Taiwan, which come under China, but they're called international within China. Europe and the US was the fastest growing. And obviously China changed 2020 in relation to internationalization. They were not wanting to reopen. What will now happen in 2021? People are saying that China may not reopen until after the Winter Olympics, which is going to be by spring of 2022. So why I was out in India is because people were looking at your outbound potential. Your middle class is what China's been for the last 5 years in the next 10 years. So everybody wants to know what's going on with your middle class. Where do they want to go? And where at the moment can they go? What we were learning and what we were discussing in Hyderabad, and a lot of you might have comments about this, is that those people from the Indian point of view is a lot of Mr. Ashwani would know, obviously, from his days in Air India, there's been a lot of pressure on the Middle East being your reason to go out of India. A lot of the travel puts you over Dubai, Abu Dhabi, or Qatar, or even Istanbul, if we're talking in Turkey as well. What is the future of an Indian international flag carrier? Air India privatization, Vistara was brought in their Dreamliners, looked at opening up London, etc. Where are you going? What's the role of Indigo, CASA, Spice, etc. on an international strategy to support your new middle class? How do you get the international airlines, not just the hubs of the Middle East, to connect back, to actually bring the hardware into India, to take your middle class back out to Europe, through Asia, or into the US? As I said, people are very interested in what was going on. And that's why there was a lot of speculation about this new phenomenon. Of course, you've suffered like all of us. The three good markets, looking here at what ICF was saying by the end of May, you wiped out about 40% of your domestic capacity in a month.
Gavin, before we go ahead,
please,
we'll take two questions.
Okay, absolutely.
Let me give you some breather to take.
Okay.
The first question comes from David. David says, there isn't a challenge in India. The main challenge in India is that Indian airlines operating from the Indian side don't have a strong international route network. Your views?
Well, as I've just highlighted, yes. I mean, you had Jet Air, correct? And Jet Air unfortunately didn't survive. And so with Jet Air going out, Air India has obviously been the international airline, connecting very strongly into US and Canada, because where you have a very significant Indian diaspora community, but also into Europe, into London, down into Madrid, Rome, Paris, etc. So you could argue that Air India was very much, but Air India was also focusing on a strong domestic connection strategy to its hub in Delhi. What Vistara was Vistara in 2019 brought in the link between Tata and Singapore Airlines was that, and then ordering Dreamliners. And they showcased the Dreamliner in Hyderabad. I went on board that aircraft. Their business class on board was as good as Emirates, as good as Qatar, as good as, this was an airline of vision. This was a business class. This was saying to that middle class Indian that wants to travel to New York in premium seats, we're giving you something. You don't have to go by Dubai, because this was brand new. And that was, is this something that will go on? What is the role of Vistara in really driving an international strategy using Dreamliners to connect? And what is the role of a new Air India, with the privatization getting quite close now to being, there's a couple of front runners looking at developing that. Where does this go? Because, as I've said, your low-cost airline companies, what are they focusing on? Is they've got a model. If you look at in Indigo and Spice is the major of that they're working a model mainly of the A320 family 737s. That will take you out to the Middle East, where you've got a lot of strategies connected with migrant, with workers, etc., families. Now, if Indigo has got A321 ultra long ranges, let's say they order ultra long ranges, which takes you between 7 and 11 hours on a single aisle, they can hit London. They can hit Paris. Now, is that the strategy of Indigo to go on the long haul single project? What you're seeing now out of JetBlue, out of the US, JetBlue's doing Boston, London. You're starting to see WestJet doing Toronto, London, using narrow body aircraft to fly transatlantic. If you start to look at the project going the other way, at the moment, SpiceJet, we're looking at, SpiceJet doesn't have long haul aircraft. They were looking at putting A330s, Acme A330 aircraft to go to London. That's not a strategy. A strategy is about building a story about a fleet that would take you outside of that 5-hour window. Because at the moment, you've got 4 airlines competing very much on domestic India. And that can also expand into the GCC countries on the basis that their aircraft can go to those markets. But if you get a big order of ultra long ranges, and who's ordering ultra long ranges are Frontier, based out of Denver, Wizz Air. Wizz Air's putting their A321 ultra long ranges in Abu Dhabi. Now, where can they go from Abu Dhabi? They can connect to India. They can go well through India. They can go out into Asia. They can go to Thailand, Malaysia, out of Abu Dhabi. So they can open up Europe into Abu Dhabi and Abu Dhabi into Asia, which AirAsia hasn't really started to do in the same way. So coming back to that question, I think, yes, wait and see, isn't it? You've got Air India under privatization. You've got Vistara that started, is having some issues at the moment, but if Singapore Airlines puts a lot of money behind the project and really pushes it, can they create something? And then what do you do with the low-cost airlines? Are they willing to go beyond the domestic and beyond GCC to start thinking of, or do you then knock on the doors of the flag carriers of Europe and Asia and bring them into India? I think if that helps the question.
I think you're fairly able to convince David. We'll see if we get more questions from David. The other question, the second question for the day comes from Dinesh. Dinesh wants to ask, do you think the international long-haul full-scale carriers are overcautious for the Indian market? And what are the inhibiting factors which is preventing them from competition with Middle East carriers?
Product. I think on the premium side, the product now the flag carriers products are with, if you look at the new, a lot of the European airline companies, be it BA, Lufthansa have ordered new A350s with new business class seats. The old 747-400s going out, Lufthansa with the 4600s. The hard product, not the service product, the hard product was a bit tired. Yeah, aircraft were a little bit old. And you were competing with, a lot of newer aircraft coming out of the Middle East. Now that's also, Emirates has been running A380s. They've got Emirates A380s up to 20 years. So they're also now refitting a lot of their hardware on the premium. So I think on the premium, maybe on the corporate side, there's been, product hadn't been as good. Obviously, the direct was point to point would make it quicker for the business traveler, not having to connect over the Middle East. But people have become kind of used to that. So maybe there's been a little bit of, we couldn't compete on the corporate routes with our product. Now we can. So I think but the question is corporate travel coming back to allow Air France, Lufthansa, BA to increase their penetration into India, or if it would be coming the other side, coming in the Chinese or the Asian carriers, Cathay, etc., coming in from Asia. So on the inbound leisure, Mr. Ashwani knows much more about it than I do, but I think Incredible India was a campaign that really sparked interest in promotion and communication 10 years ago. It was kind of won awards for this is how to promote and present a destination. Has India, if you look at European tourism, there's been a lot of push to emerging destinations. Thailand has done well. Sri Lanka. Goa doesn't have the image that it used to. Goa was a very strong winter sun destination from Europe back 5 to 10 years ago. Caribbean has taken a lot more. You've got destinations have come in, and whilst you focus a lot on domestic, have you lost a little bit of some of the international strategy coming into India because you've been so busy with domestic tourism? It's not a negative. You can't serve everybody, and at some point the domestic tourism has been so good that it's been there. We say the hanging fruits to get if I'm a hotelier in Goa, it's much easier to try and bring people down from Delhi than go to Germany and talk to tour operator TUI about flying in Dreamliners into Goa. I'll just get a couple more flights from Delhi. The same as what we've seen here with the European model. We've lost a lot of international travel longer haul because we've been able to penetrate much more on the point-to-point short haul. So I think whilst the domestic has boomed, it's been easy. The question as we move forward from now is, do we look at international again? And that route development brings India tourism, airports, airlines back together, which is what we're going to cover when we open a little bit more our discussion on what is air services, because the triangle becomes really important, that you would have India tourism with you. And we would look at how, what are we pushing? I don't know if Mr. Ashwani, if you want to say anything about had domestic kind of taken precedence over international just because it been so successful. I think we have lost Ashwani. Okay, no. It's just because I saw his face and I know he mentioned he was running India tourism, so it's important to let people. I think that's what as I said, this is an opportunistic time now to get the regions of India together on with the airports and say, what next? As we say, if the airlines are thinking about changing some of their hardware, what opportunities would be to look at new sources? The fastest growing market into the Maldives, the number one market into the Maldives this summer is Saudi Arabia, not Europe. So, and that's not coming with Emirates. So all of a sudden, why? Fly NAS. Somebody's done a deal, and all of a sudden you've got this strategy going into the Maldives as the number one source market is Saudi Arabia going into the Maldives. So again, it's as things unpan, there's huge opportunities. So I think any other comments, or should I move on?
Yes. We will take one more question.
Okay, please do so.
This has come from Siddhant. Siddhant says, does a favorable air service agreement between governments be made mandatory? Something like sea deployment, would that help? Or do you see some other things happening so that the air services become much more easier?
I think governments have to, obviously governments have to, at the same time, we're trying to get less government control in aviation. We're talking about open skies. And the more government control aviation, the more you create this belief that it's not open. So the back to that question is that governments are trying to take less stake in regulation and try to open up markets the best they can. So, okay, we don't want anarchy and that we lose all respect on what is air services. What we try to do here is, yes, if governments can allow bilaterals, where governments need to do is open up bilaterals. We need to change the rules on who can fly, how many times they can fly, etc. So if we can try to remove some of the bilaterals, that's where the governments can get in. Then it's basically airport and airline discussions with stakeholders, and we'll talk about this later. The stakeholders can go four ways. They can be government themselves, so that can be the tourism boards, which are run by governments. It can be chambers of commerce, which is a kind of a quango public-private partnership. So you bring in hoteliers, restaurants, attractions, etc., because they see the benefit of working. The chambers of commerce on the opposite, taking people out and helping businesses that want to introduce their products into new markets. So yes, we may be talking a little bit more about tourism at the moment, but from an airline's point of view, the ability to connect outbound and inbound is equal in that case. So, that, and also then what's going on with some of the way that we look at the DMOs and the people that manage the destinations, how are they involved? Because they have the ability to support the demand. And it's the demand maybe that's interesting. So I think it's trying to position here that let the market dictate, but then have the airline and the airports and their partners working together. One of the questions later, we'll do a poll that supports the answer. So I don't want to give the game away, but yes, what will get in the way of good air services is one of the poll questions, and it links very much back to that question as we move through. So I think,
yes, Gavin, let's continue. We'll continue.
Okay.
We'll take the questions.
Okay.
As we proceed. We'll take more questions.
Okay, so what is air service development? So let's try and understand where we've come from. In the past, very much network planning. Airlines have a department called network planning. What they do is they define where we should fly, how often, which aircraft, and what time. What we're saying is that that's the airline side. What we should be thinking about is how we move that to this partnership project. How do we try and look at how do we optimize the airport's network? Which air services can we maximize both revenues for the airport and benefits for the community being in and out. So we're trying to move this project. We shouldn't be talking about airlines network. We should be talking about an airports network with its partners. This is the difference. It's a terminology difference, but it's this mindset that gets you to think differently. It's not about an airport talking to a network manager. It's about a community talking to an airline community. You know, in the days of an airport talking to an airline, that isn't the best way to think about air service development. And with that question in mind, I'm going to open up one of the polls, a second poll, if you don't mind. So what we'll say, air service development, let me launch the poll. Air service development is the role of an airline. That is their job. They need to fly aircraft. Should we not then leave air services to airlines? Why should we bother with this mini masterclass today? What relevance is there for airports, tourism boards, chambers of commerce to be involved? Shouldn't we just say, okay, airline, you have the power, you have the hardware, you'll bring your planes to my airport? Why should we not allow airlines to be just in control? So airlines don't understand, not as a negative, but you bring the airport and the community, you bring things that they don't know. We have money. Money shouldn't be everything. Let's be honest. We're not saying that we shouldn't be buying airlines. We shouldn't be paying for routes that make no sense. You have more aircraft. You know, you are getting more deliveries. So you're going to need some help to know where to put them. And we should work together. We should try to have some sort of group think here. Let's talk together rather than one believing, you know, there's an expression, synergy, the sum of the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. An airline, an airport, and tourism are parts. No, let's bring them together as a whole. So I'll give you five more seconds for anybody that hasn't yet voted. And then I will end and share. So 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, so first 25% of you believe that airlines don't fully understand. That's very important, that you can bring information that they can't get access to, and particularly we'll talk about this, very much more qualitative insights. You know, airlines can buy studies and airlines can buy data, but they can't always get the kind of what we call the real, you know, the nuts and bolts of what's going on in your community. Money is good, 18% of you, so it's not the driver, which is a good thing to see, that we're not just here to give money aimlessly to airlines. No, that money has to justify why we're thinking of a route. 14% of you believe that we have the ability to help you with your aircraft. But I think what you're rightly saying is 3/4 of you, let's work together. It doesn't make sense for an airport just to talk to a network planner. It makes sense to create what we're going to say later, and I'm jumping a little bit ahead, what we can call an air service organization. Bring the community, the airline and the airport to the table and create a working party that allows that ability. So saying that, let's continue. So thank you very much for your attention. So why not leave it? We've got different motivations. You know, we know what's going on in our local markets. We have information that the others don't have. So we shouldn't just think about airlines being in control. And I think more importantly is we have this perception, we can help share your risk. It's all about risk at the moment. And I think that's got to be a key point of this next part of my discussion. Who had power? Airport, airline, or passengers? So it's not a question in terms of a poll, but let me try and think. 2019, who had the power? Airports. Probably did. Why does Gavin think airports had power? Well, business was booming. IATA was saying that the predictions of 2019 was 5% growth in aviation and about 3 to 4% growth for the next 20 years. So let's be honest, the airports, you had airlines flying. Tourism was at 1.4 billion tourists, again growing. So as long as your airport was open, you probably would have had demand. Did the airlines have power? They did, but I think, and airports were getting a little bit, there was some saturation in airports, and it comes back to the question before about opening up airspace. There was a lot of constraints across some of the world markets. Why are you looking at opening new airports in Delhi, Mumbai, etc., is to allow for more opportunities. Where have there been new airports recently in the last couple of years? China, Beijing, and it went slightly under the radar because of the pandemic, but Chengdu opened a new airport 1 month ago with another 80 million passenger movement. So you're taking Chengdu, the two airports of Chengdu now go up to about 160 million passenger movements a year. And you also saw the new airport of Beijing, which would take the both Beijing together to about 200 million. With the third phase of the new airport, they go up to about 250 million passenger movements. The other new airport that opened, again, a little bit under the radar, was a new terminal within Salt Lake City. So, there's not been a huge new airports that were opening for airlines to take their increased hardware. So there's been a little bit of pressure on airports. So airports could kind of bargain. The bargaining power of an airport over an airline was a little bit stronger. You want to fly to my airport, it's capacity constrained. Maybe my incentive is not as good as it needs to be because I have a bit more bargaining power. Did the passenger have the power? Of course they did, because they can define where they travel. But generally, in the game of the ecosystem, the passenger was not as important in terms of they were able to pick and travel where airlines were expanding. What the pandemic has done, interestingly, is put airlines looking more at passengers. Where are they traveling? Where are they wanting to travel? As I mentioned in my earlier discussion, there's been a big drive for airlines to work with the social media platforms on research, trying to understand search patterns. What are people looking for? That's going to be very interesting as we move forward. If we can kind of start to understand passenger profiling and really mirror that, maybe that allows the airlines to get some power back by saying, now we want to fly to these airports because passengers will come with us. So maybe the airline and passenger side is getting a lot closer in relation to working in some sort of ecosystem, sharing insights. Airline and airport, it's trying to remove this mindset of how much are the taxes and what incentive do you have to know where can we work together a lot more in relation to positioning. So first thing is, who's got the power in the new world post-COVID? It's got to be airlines. As I've been saying, they've realized during the pandemic that they can be nimble. They've been forced to think about repositioning their capacity. And they're now looking for opportunities to move their hardware much quicker than they've ever thought. If you think about this wider story of tourism, hotels can't do that. A hotel can't move its hotel. If I have a hotel in Goa and all of a sudden I need to move it, I can't move it. But a plane can move around to different airports. So the ability for airlines to be nimble is where they can use this pandemic in their success. And this is where I think airports have to really start to start looking with that passenger trend data. What is topical at the moment? What are people searching for? And going to the airlines before the airlines have been able to think. Where we're seeing opportunities in certain routes, certain markets. How can we work together with you, the airline, to drive that route to my airport and support the demand that's coming from the passenger and putting that proposition together? And again, that's when maybe the private sector can be important to try and do that. Bringing in the hotel sector to support the project. to allow people to see where those opportunities may lie. What's interesting, and I'm showing a strange picture here. This is a private bank, UBS. I'm sure you've heard of them. They're one of the biggest in investment in private banks in the world. They've been running a campaign for some time that's called You and Us, which is basically this, what they call two-man partnership. It's you and your investor and the person managing your money coming together. It's very strange that a private bank has to tell their investors that they are in partnership. But why I like this is it's a very interesting analogy for us now in our industry. The you and us. What are we talking about here? The you are the airlines in this forum today. And the us is the airports. How is the you? What is the you doing? Well, the you doesn't know at the moment. The you is trying. Do we push domestic? Do we push international? During 2020, we pushed domestic. Why? Because it was what we could do. 2021, have we shown pockets of international have opened? Europe is a good example of that. And there's been 600 new routes launched this summer in Europe. 600 new routes. Half of those have come from EasyJet, Ryanair, and Wizz. So 3 of the low costs have driven 300 new routes. And that's not just all domestic. Yes, there's quite a little bit of domestic in Italy. A lot of that's gone to Greece, Greek islands, because they've been open. So again, there's been speculation. We're going to put flights from Germany, Spain, UK to Greece, to airports that we hadn't flown to before. So all of a sudden, there has been, what are we flying, narrow body or wide body? Again, narrow body seemed to have been where we've put things back quicker. Why? Because it's been more associated with the low cost. One of the biggest challenges for the legacy airlines is that, the hub has been tarnished during the pandemic. If I'm flying a lot of travel for, let's say, North America to Europe, and I don't have North America open, I'm fighting point to point of Europe against the low cost. So if I'm BA or if I'm Lufthansa, let's say I'm I'm focusing here on US market is only now opening up. For months, it's not been open. So I'm taking a lot of that traffic over London, Paris, or Frankfurt to another destination in Europe, or even on to a third international destination. That hasn't been available. So where we've seen significant growth has been the narrow bodies with the low cost. So they've moved aircraft around European hubs as opportunities have risen. Who's also grown very quickly is Russia, the US. So whilst you were seeing, and I showed you with that, the ICF data, you were back at about 20% pre-pandemic at the point of February, and then you dropped 40 percentage points to the end of May because of COVID. So Russia overtook India and the US with some of the fastest recovering domestic markets. Whilst China had been a lot stronger in 2020. Whilst we were all kind of locked down, China pushed a big domestic strategy in 2020. 2021, China's domestic push has not gone as well as the previous year. The government has kind of stopped travel a little bit. There's been a little bit of more closures of some of the provinces within China. Who's really succeeded in the big, we talk about the big 4 domestic markets, India, China, Russia, and the US. US and Russia have been the 2 strongest. Actually, Russia overtook the US to be the biggest domestic market. And what Aeroflot did there was put a lot of their strategy onto their low-cost partner. They're called Pobeda Airlines. So Aeroflot has a full-service airline. Aeroflot full service wasn't flying because Aeroflot was trying to connect Moscow to the world. The world wasn't open. But Pobeda, which was the domestic airline of Aeroflot Group, took on a major expansion, and Aeroflot lent aircraft to Pobeda and even started to fly out of the main airport of Moscow rather than the low-cost airport, which is where Pobeda were using. They were able to really penetrate. So Russia became the fastest domestic market because it was narrow-body driven. And again, to whom? How is the EU looking? Are they pushing leisure? Are they pushing business? Today, everybody's talking about leisure. People don't know if corporate travel is coming back. And that's got to be a worry for the legacy airlines. As you know, we make money at the front of the aircraft, not at the back of the aircraft. So if the long-haul corporate traveler doesn't travel as much, there's a lot of the legacy airlines will suffer, because the yields they're making in business class is offsetting the losses of their economy to compete. So if you think about where you've got point-to-point low cost, if I take instance, if you're thinking about flying London, Frankfurt. If I've got London, Frankfurt with Lufthansa and BA, and I've got London, Frankfurt with Ryanair, it's not in the interest of BA and Lufthansa to price their economy at the point of Ryanair's economy, because they'll lose money, because their unit cost, as we all know, their CAS, cost available seat kilometre, is probably at around 5 to 6 cents a kilometre versus Ryanair's, which is at 3 cents a kilometre. So if you're going to compete on point-to-point economy with a legacy versus a low cost, you're going to lose money. Where you're going to differentiate is in the premium cabin to offset. So you're making money at the front to offset the losses in the back to hopefully make the route profitable. But if you're losing that premium capacity at the front, it isn't about putting more seats in. It's not about removing business class and putting more seats in to then run an A320 with 180 seats rather than 150 seats, because that will potentially reduce your RASK, your revenue opportunities, whilst your costs are still as high. So you'll actually make it worse. So I think what you're saying here is that there's a real need for the premium to come back. Otherwise, some of the legacy airlines have to really rethink. Interestingly, what are we starting to see now? There's a movement within the Lufthansa group. They've just launched a new leisure airline called Eurowings Discover. Eurowings Discover will be a mixture of long haul and short haul. So it's not just, and what they're trying to now say here is that will Eurowings Discover be able to help Lufthansa Group across its other markets, other providers, reduce its cost available seat kilometre by changing some of the business models to try. So it's a little bit wait and see. But I think at the moment, what we're saying, it's been domestic whilst international is not open. International will come back. Narrow body is growing quicker because, as I've said, you don't have the corporate global hub projects as quickly as we'd have liked. And the focus has been leisure because we're in that mindset that companies have still not yet encouraged everybody to go back to their offices. They still kind of work from home in some cases. What now will happen will be interesting to see. There is some companies are talking, I think I've just read somewhere, Google is telling people still don't work in the office until next year. So not everybody's saying go back to their offices. So will this make an impact in that market? So how is the EU? Opportunities, as I've said, huge potential for airports to work with airlines in a different way. How is the us? How are you, the airports? Well, what do you want? Do you want to basically chase the chase the supply? Do you want to incentivize aviation? Or do you want to work with your partners to support demand? Where do you see your way forward? Is it about trying to get more routes? Do we chase the routes? Do we chase the passengers? It's the chicken and egg. If the passengers come, the routes will arrive. If the routes arrive, will the passengers necessarily travel? I showed you in the earlier slides, we've got this conundrum at the moment. The airlines are putting in capacity, but the yield is falling. This can't continue. Airlines cannot continue to put major capacity in and not get the yield coming back. So somewhere in this equation, we have to get demand back. We have to get price to be realistic. How do we get price to be realistic when we don't have any algorithms anymore? The yield management systems have gone. We have no yield management from 2019, 2020. Theoretically, what we had in 2019 has disappeared in 2020. So if the computer will now look back, looking back is gone. So how do you price at the moment? Well, again, a lot of it's coming from search, looking at what people are trying to understand. And algorithms and the way that we use search is going to be an interesting way that we try and understand demand and pricing, whilst we have to renegotiate the revenue management platforms because we've made 1 year of complete differences in our prices because we didn't have availability, or we had availability and no demand. So the systems are not going to throw out the right fares. So a little bit of work to be done. As an airport, where do you see your focus? Getting airlines to come back as the driver of the mindset, or getting demand to come and the supply will arrive? Of course, it's equal, but it's about where you put your emphasis. Because what I'm really saying here is, do you throw incentives at the airlines, or do you throw incentives at the demand creation? If you're throwing incentives at the airline, it's you, the airport, on your own. If you're throwing incentives at the demand, it's you, the airport, working with the communities, which I want to come on and talk about when we discuss air service organizations. So that's the kind of the you and us. And what we're saying now post-COVID is that, yes, we bring this project together. Airports, communities, and airlines sitting at the table together. In the past, it had been very much airports negotiated with airlines, and airlines then had the bargaining power. If airlines wanted to, they may go and talk to their stakeholders and say, this is coming, are you prepared to help? They may say, we don't need the help, we'll do it on our own. But there kind of wasn't this partnership. It was airports and airlines. Where we're moving to is this concept of being together, but thinking that trust, and as you highlighted in the poll example, we build trust and confidence working in partnership. We share risk, we share information, we give insights that help. We need new incentives. If you think about airlines have had a lot of change in the last 9 months. They took the first few months. This is an expression, we call it deers being an animal in the headlights of a car. Unfortunately, they see lights and they run in front of the car. That's what airlines were doing at the start of the pandemic. They were like, oh my God, we don't know what to do. Let's stop flying. Let's close everything, put everybody at home. And then they realized they had to start doing something. So they moved from kind of panic to, okay, what next? Is this a time for me to remove my old aircraft? Yes, it is. Let's take out those older aircraft. Let's resize. Let's reorder. Let's rethink. So, but in some cases, that's also meant that they had to go and ask for help. That help now has come from different entities. It's come from lessors, and the way that the lessors now are working with the leasebacks and the payments of aircraft. It's governments. There are many of the legacy airlines that are out there today, which are owned with a major stake by the governments. And that then means that, they have to be their levels of risk have to be, or their opportunities of risk is less, because their shareholder is now the government. You can't take as much risk, because you've got another level of approval to go through. So the routes that will be approved will be a lot more likely to go ahead than we've ever seen. So the way that we incentivize that has to change. And as I keep saying, it's about building the right demand. And that kind of leads to the new realities. Airlines do have more opportunities. In most cases, there are growth of airlines. There are less aircraft, in storage. We're seeing more and more airlines starting to reopen their orders and bring forward certain orders. And so there is going to be a challenge at some point that airlines do have more service And so that they then need to really think about where they place. Presently, it's quite simple. We can fly a route if it covers our costs. We can't fly if we lose money. In the past, that may not have been the case. We may have used loss-making routes to gain market share. We may have used opportunities to cut out other airlines. We flew to protect. Where some airlines are being a little bit negative is about the way that the associations have lobbied civil aviation on the slot waivers, particularly here in Europe. There seems to be a belief, particularly from the low-cost airlines, that the slot waivers that we've got in Europe, where the airlines on the 2080 principle, so you've got to use, you were supposed to use the 80% of your slots, etc. That's been removed down to 50%. And within that 50, you only have to do half of them. That's meant airports look busy, but they're not necessarily busy. If you're trying to get slots at the moment in certain airports, you may not get them because they're being protected just in case the market comes back. Some airlines see that as being a little bit anti-competitive. And certainly those airlines that want to be bold, kind of bullish, they're feeling that this slot waiver should not continue. At the moment, it's continuing through the winter. It hasn't yet been defined what summer 22 slot waivers will look like. I can't see that we can still protect slots for summer 22 in the same way that we've been doing in 21. And so maybe there'll be a reshaking up of airport slots to allow airlines to think about where they fly. And that allows you, the airports, also to welcome new opportunities, because maybe, as I've shown, maybe you've got slots protected with flights that make no sense. And it's maybe a good thing for you, the airports, as well. But I think more importantly, what this pandemic and what the disruption has given to airlines is the ability to want to change planning. The idea that I'm planning for summer 22 now, that's gone. I'm now still planning summer 21. If there's any last minute opportunities, I haven't really thought about winter. I've got a holding schedule, because I need people to book tickets, because I need working capital, but I've not really confirmed my winter schedule yet. And we're 2.5 months from my IATA winter starting. Summer 22, wow, that's a long way away. And that would normally be planned now. So I think from an airline's point of view, that's where they are. Throw that to your side as the airport people in the room. How can you work with that? You've got to disrupt your principles with your contracting, the way that you work with the ground handling companies, etc. It's about flexibility. And this idea of slot waivers doesn't help this either, because that doesn't allow for experimentation. And I think, that's one of the opportunities where you've seen a lot of experimentation has been in airports where you didn't have many slots. Coming back, as I've said, to Wyoming and Montana, they were probably getting 5 flights a day, and now they're getting 50 flights a day. So it's a little bit different if you're talking about Heathrow. Interestingly, there was, during the pandemic, there was some interesting moves by some airlines to try and move in, even Gatwick, which is very difficult to get in. When there was a perception that British Airways was taking out quite a lot of slots at Gatwick, Wizz Air opened a base. They could only put 1 aircraft there during that point, but it sent out a message. We're waiting. We don't think BA is coming back into Gatwick like it used to be. You're the airport. You hope they do, because this is what you know. But actually, we're waiting, and we're going to put a plane in there. It's like a test. We're going to show you, Mr. Airport, that just in case they don't come back, we're ready to take them. So I think there's been a lot of low-cost jockeying for positions in airports, trying to say we can come in and shake up disruption. Don't just wait for the flag carriers to come back. Give us a chance, because we may be able to do things that they weren't doing. And that's got to be important for the way airlines think. So what are we doing? How are we trying to build our air services Are we doing the easiest thing and retaining existing routes? Are we talking to our existing carriers and saying, hey guys, are you coming back? What are you doing? And how might you support them? Well, I suppose if you're going to support them, and I'm jumping a little bit because of time, maybe the way you support them is that you look at maybe some offset costs. Maybe you say, okay, if you retain extra routes, we can do some deals with you on the landing charges, etc. So you can use your internal cost structure as a way to get airlines to re-engage quickly with existing flights. Obviously, the airlines hope that those flights will have the demand, but it's simple. This is going from the most simple to the most difficult. Maybe you say, no, let's try to use this kind of post-pandemic now to look at getting existing airlines to be a little bit more opportunistic. Let's look at some inbound potential. Let's look at maybe looking, as I've sent you, with some of the tourism opportunities. Are there some source markets? Why did Maldives all of a sudden get Saudi Arabia? Would Saudi Arabia be of interest to tourism, etc., as an opportunity? Just throwing out different thinking here, starting to look at your existing airlines and saying, oh, can you go a little bit further? Could you do a different type of route? For that, maybe they don't need cost subsidies. Maybe that's all about creating demand, yeah? So number one is cost subsidies. Number two, this is demand generation. This is when you get your local stakeholders involved. The inbound tourism, the chambers of commerce, the hotel association can join the table and say, okay, let's look at something here. We want airline X to do a bit more flying. Could airline X open up a certain source market that could bring some potential? So we're not taking a huge risk as an airline. We're trying to potentially make a little bit, maybe there are some niche opportunities, some experiments we can try. We have aircraft already based in this airport. Whilst we're not flying as many corporate routes, maybe we're not doing as many Delhi, Mumbai's, we were doing 7 a day, we're now only doing 3 a day. Maybe we could look at using that aircraft to do something a bit different. So that's maybe that, but for that, as an airline, it's not about reducing my costs. It's about helping me stimulate demand because it's you're asking me to try and change something. Number three, as we said, if you've now started to see that with the shake-up, you've lost some airlines or the airlines have reduced their fleets, they don't have as much capacity as they did, maybe it's time to think about looking to go wider on new routes with these companies and pushing that forward. But I think, what you also now have to think about is where are there new route potentials opening up? Again, slot waivers haven't been able, maybe there have been some airports that have wanted to do more than this, but the airlines haven't been able to get the best slots because there hasn't been, the waivers have been protecting the legacy and not allowing growth. But as that now starts to change, this is an opportunity for the airports and the communities to really be bullish and start talking to the airlines about where can you take this new hardware? Thinking, as I've said, when that question came up before about where what are the plane orders? What's important to now understand is where are the airlines going? What are opportunities? And how might you, if you're an airport that couldn't, I'm looking at examples again. If I'm looking at North America to Europe, if I've got to fly an A330 to go across the Atlantic, that's going to be around 280 to 330 seats to fly. From East Coast USA to Western Europe. That's a lot of seats to fill. So if I'm a secondary airport, an airline isn't going to look at you because the only way the airline will fill over 300 seats is if we heavily discount or it's a seasonal route because there's a lot of family travel, etc. But if you're trying to open up a route that you can now do with an A321 long range, which you can do up to 9 hours, that'll bring you about 180 seats to 200. Depends on what you do with the business class, if you have a business class or not, or if you have a premium economy. You've gone from 180 or from 300 to 180. That allows JFK to open up to secondary airports in Europe that couldn't take an A330. That's game changing. And how can airports use that to open up new markets that you'd never thought about. This is where, looking, if I'm working here in Europe, I can open up leisure destinations to North Americans that I couldn't normally do. North Americans were touching cities. I can now open up golf from JFK to southern Portugal or southern Spain because I only bring 180 people, not 300. So the risk to the airline to sell 180 seats is a lot less than selling 300. Plus the fuel efficiencies of a narrow body is about 25% down on the CASK of a wide body. Yes, my RASK may change because I don't have business class the same. I'm not going to have 30 business class seats like I would have on an A330 where I can really highly yield. But maybe on that leisure route, I wasn't going to get 30 corporate travelers coming to play golf. I'm going to get premium American leisure golf that doesn't want economy, but they're not corporates. So mirror that into your market for those in the end. Where can you connect? Going to the ultra long range, that takes you to 11 hours. If you do semicircles from Delhi, Mumbai, Hyderabad, Bangalore, 9 hours, 11 hours, that's your opportunities at airports. If the 21 long range and ultra long range, if your Indian airline companies aren't ordering it, check the other ones who are and see if they can reach. Because that's what's got to be this opportunity. The hardware is changing. Okay, this isn't tomorrow. The orders for the talking about 23, 24, 25, when the ultra long range will be going out. But this is where you've got to start thinking. Where can it come in from Asia? The same way. So, of course, as you go through this, it's more risk, which means we need more partnerships. Gijo, do you want me to take any questions?
Yes.
Please.
We'll take some questions at this moment. One question that comes from Sunny is that, isn't the Zoom MS Teams affecting the business travel? Your comments.
It's hard to say. I think obviously in the situation we had, where we've come from, of course, Zoom and Teams was immediate in 2020 because there was nothing, that's what we had to use. Obviously, as we start to open, it's a little bit different. There's been a couple of, in our industry, there was an event in Dubai, not in Dubai, in Ras Al Khaimah, the Arab Aviation Summit did an event where people could go in person. I think at the moment there is a little bit of reluctance. I think there's a rush. People want to go to these events. People want to go back to traveling and meeting people. Of course, at the moment, we're still not making international travel easy. We're allowing people to travel. Europeans, US can come to Europe. What they need to do, they need to be vaccinated. I can't go there, but they can come here. But they also have to do 2 PCR tests. But if you come in for a week, that's not so bad. If I was going to America for 24 hours or 48 hours, can I be bothered to do 2 tests? So I think at the moment, we've kind of helped leisure. If I want to go for a holiday for a week, and that with Croatia, so from JFK and Newark to Croatia, made sense. People went on holiday for a week. Okay, I have to do a couple of tests. It's not cheap, but I can... I want holidays, the tests, but to make people do tests on business, it's not so flexible the same way. So I think until we kind of say we're really, opening is not just about vaccines, it's also about testing. Testing is discouraging people to travel for a conference because you might just be going in for 1 or 2 days. And until we really say you can travel, you're vaccinated, which means you don't need to do tests, I think Zoom and Teams will still be the winners. Until that changes, I think people will go much more people will want to go back to in-person events. What's going to be the difference is the internal strategies of companies, the way companies look at their internal meetings, etc. has this changed the way that, you don't fly, I don't fly to Madrid 1 hour away from me here to meet the company office there. That we now do by Teams. But I go to the World Travel Market in London because I need to go and speak to suppliers. That, I think there's a difference. Zoom and Teams is, that makes travel, business travel, you're going to see less day travel, but I still think you'll see opportunities for people that want to go to events, etc.
Right.
Hope that helps the question. But yeah, we don't know yet. I think, as I've said, a lot of the opening has been leisure related.
Correct.
Or it's family travel. So you're going for a week, 2 weeks, seeing friends, etc. We haven't kind of encouraged yet 1 day, 2 day trips internationally. I haven't thought about going to New York for a meeting, staying one night and flying back the next day, which we would have done in 2019, right? That's why BA was having 8 flights a day from London to New York, because people went not just for the day, but they didn't want to be staying in hotels if they could get home that same day. So yes, that bit we still have to, we don't know yet.
Yes.
Any others whilst we're
here? We'll take one more question. This is from Mr. Anthony. What he says is he's asking your views. Shouldn't the airports work along with the local governments to develop infrastructure which can make the leisure travel a little more better, a little more vibrant, and probably the industry can then probably bounce back?
Yeah, absolutely. And in a slide or two, I'll show that. But yeah, the question is completely right. That what you've got to do here is create the ecosystem that supports the togetherness. So governments own tourism. Tourism boards are, you've got, in most cases, tourism boards are still owned by the government. You've got tourism boards and DMOs. DMOs can be private. New York, as an example, New York tourism is a private business. Visit USA is state, it's government. So theoretically, what you could argue at the moment, who's got money in the triangle? It's not the airlines, it's not the airports, it's governments. Why? Because governments use tourism as the multiplier effect. If you incentivize a tourist, let's say you're incentivizing a flight of 10 euros, 15 euros per seat, doesn't matter. And that's something we go, when we go into the masterclasses properly, we get into the real nuts and bolts. If you think about, what's important for tourism to a country is the multiplier effects of, I look here in Portugal, the Bank of Portugal says a German spends 100 euros a day in the country. So if we can incentivize through marketing somebody to come from Germany to Portugal and they come here for a week, theoretically, that's a German has spent 700 euros without paying the accommodation. That's just the average spend per day of an individual. They stayed in a hotel. That hotel is owned by a private company who pays IRS to the government. In that hotel, you're served by an employee who pays Social Security to the government. So whatever the government's giving in a marketing incentive to bring the tourist to the destination, your multiplier effect of that flight is significant to the bigger picture of the country. It's a no-brainer to focus on the question. The fact that we don't always do this is why we're having the masterclasses, because, be honest with you, it's not in all cases that we've created the triangle. There's a lot more we can do to bring these three parties together, because if the government can join in, what we have done in the past, and I'm going to talk about this, is what we call revenue guarantees. Revenue guarantees is when we underwrite losses to airlines. Not all countries can do this because of the limits on what we can call state aid, but there are some nations that can do revenue guarantees. That means, as an airline, look, I'm going to fly a route. I think I've got 70% load factor minimum. I don't think I might get 80, I don't know. So what a revenue guarantee is, I will pay your losses between what is your break even and what you wanted. So let's say you say, okay, I can try and get 80%, but I only get 70. I'll pay you 10. That's a revenue guarantee. So from an airline, I break even. So I'm going to fly. And a lot of pre-pandemic, this was how the Caribbean grew, because they were giving revenue guarantees to all the airlines. Airlines were flying. The revenue guarantees were being given to the airline. The airline didn't lose any money. And the destination received the tourist. What happened then is that the airline said, but where's the marketing? Because I'm an airline. My job is not now to market the destination. And that's where the tour operators would come in. And the tour operators in the country would then have to try to work the seats of the airline. So the revenue guarantee was given by the government to the airline, but they didn't give the marketing support to the tour operator to then also help fill the seats of the airline. It's what I said before, they chase supply. Revenue guarantees guarantee an airline won't lose money. If you went above, we don't pay you because you've achieved the threshold. What it's basically saying is there's a buffer. An airline has a feeling that this is not going to work. Or you'd convince me to fly, and we do the business case, and there's a 10% buffer that says, no, I won't cover all my margins. You pay me my losses. If I go above, then I've done my job as an airline. So you don't need to give me anything. So a revenue guarantee can be zero, or it can be as much as the losses as the airline says, according to what they need for break even. That's why I said in my model, we need new incentives. We can't think like that anymore. That's not a partnership model. That's not bringing in the tour operators. That's not bringing promotion. That's basically underwriting the losses of an airline. Now, you can't do that here in Europe under the EU state aid, etc. You cannot write revenue guarantees to lose money because that's distortion of competition. Of course, and so in some cases, governments have got together and said, no, we don't want to distort competition, we want to enhance competition. So I think what that then says is, this relationship is always changing. But it's so important to get the community together rather than just think about chasing the supply. That's why I had on the us slide, chase supply, support demand. So I didn't know the question was coming, but it's important that I try to link that back. Is that okay, Guijo? Can I?
Yes, let's continue.
Okay. Thank you, everybody. So a few more slides and any final questions. I'll jump this slide. It's well, no, I won't jump. But I'll be quick. So what I'm trying to say here, I just need to expand the screen. Excuse me 1 second. So I talked just to highlight, where we've come from. So I talked about airlines from the airport side. So what is your focus? On the airline side, how are we looking? I just pulled off, this was interesting information from Spirit. It's a low cost in the US, but I like this matrix that they're using. They talk about, it's a typical four box matrix. Reminds me of the olden days of the Boston box, BCG strategy, etc. But they're talking about broad and niche and dense and thin. So broad and niche is in terms of the capacity potential. Dense and thin is numbers of frequencies. So this is an airline at Fort Lauderdale. FLL is one of their big hubs. They've got 6 flights a day between Atlanta and Fort Lauderdale. That's a very broad source market. They've got a hub in Atlanta. They've got a hub in Philadelphia, in Fort Lauderdale. They're flying backwards and forwards. That would be like Indigo doing, a Delhi Mumbai. Dense route, 6 a day, very broad customer base. Is that where you think market growth can be? That's a lot of corporate travel in there. That's going to be a worry. That's what we've just been saying. The Delhi Mumbai's, maybe have not been growing. The Frankfurt Munich's. If people are going to do a lot more Zoom and Teams, the dense and broad doesn't need 6 daily. So all of a sudden, maybe you can start to think about removing some of that capacity. Staying on that left side of the matrix, Cleveland, Myrtle Beach. They said, look, Cleveland is not a hub of theirs. It was a secondary airport. Myrtle Beach is a destination focused on leisure. They started flying 11 a week. This was route experimentation. They did a W pattern. They connected Fort Lauderdale, Cleveland, Myrtle Beach. So they didn't base aircraft up there. They flew it on a W pattern. So it's a niche route, meaning that it's seasonal. It's June to September because it's when people are on holiday. They wouldn't normally be doing this, but because people were not traveling outside of the US, they jumped in and did a niche dense. You don't think about doing niche dense. 11 weekly flights on a route that you were never doing previously. That's a huge change in the strategy of an airline. And you can mirror that across multiple airlines that have done similar. They've opened up loads of routes where there was no service. The service was via a hub. And now they've gone point to point. So interestingly, staying on the thin side now, this is Aruba, Fort Lauderdale. So it's a 1 week, it's basically a charter flight. It covers a bit of everybody. This is, again, there are some opportunities here, and this is where, you know, tourism has fit in. The bottom one is a small airport in Colombia. It's ethnic travel diaspora, a lot of Colombians living in Miami. And this has been where an airline has said, okay, we've got a thin route, very niche. There's no tourists on here. It's purely VFR. It's low yield, but there's no competition, and we can fill it easily. So I like the way it's an interesting matrix for how an airline thinks. Run it via your airports, and you do the same. Look at your airlines and try and put your airlines into a matrix like this with their routes and see, okay, where might be the problems in 2022? If the corporate doesn't come back on Mumbai, Delhi, does that give Indigo a few seats available? Where could they switch things? You know, you've got to go to them and not wait for them to come to you. This is what I'm trying to say. And that leads me to this relationship then. How do we do this? How do we decide, let's call it the 4Ds, not the 4Ps of marketing, the 4Ds of ASD. First D, determine. Determine is about which routes do you want. Again, don't wait for them to come to you. What are you looking for? Going back to our matrix, new routes, existing routes, new carriers, etc. What can you offer? Yes, incentives will be there, but this is not the driver, right? Decide what we can offer. With who? Get the design together, work with the different stakeholders, like the question that been said, and try to sustain momentum. What airlines are looking for now is commitment on routes, not just for short-term gain. As I said, a lot of the airlines are being scrutinized by government. Their owners are now governments. Their owners are lessors. The lessors want to know, all of a sudden, the shareholder running an airline, you've got a lot more people looking into your projects. You can't hide as much anymore. You've got stakeholders that are now ministers. You've got banks that are the eyes and the ears are everywhere. They'll be checking, why are you doing that route? That seems a bit risky. Are you sure it's a good route? So from an airline's point of view, again, they're going to need you. What they don't want to be doing is launching a route and stopping it, because that's going to make, politically, that's not going to be good for their owners. They shouldn't be jumping around. So a lot more robustness is going to be the driver of the future. Again, we'll go into detail when we do masterclasses properly in this, but I think what I'm showing here is when I've been on both sides. I've worked for an airline, and I've worked for a tourism board, and I've worked for airports. As an airline, I think what we get from you, the airports, we get the same as what we can buy. You've got to go beyond what's not available from a third-party research company. You've got to really talk to me in information that I don't have as an airline. And I don't have it because I'm looking at 20 routes. I want to really pinpoint the economic and demographics. Get into the psychographics as well, profiles. If it's people coming in, people going out, tour operators, who's on the flights, who could be on the flights. This is market research that you do in your tourism or your chambers of commerce teams. Give me the data that I can't get from the system. Don't just tell me what I already know. And I think sometimes airlines complain that the business cases from airports linking with aviation and air service development, you just tell me what I already have, which is potential numbers of passengers. Get into the detail, get into the semantics, get into the qualitative data. That's the bit, insights and the psychographics are what will make a difference, because I can't buy that data. Or I can, but I'm not going to do a market research report for one route. But you've got it because you're talking with visitors that stay in hotels. You're talking with people in airports. You've got data about profiles that we really need. And also use some of the source market information. If it's a route that's coming into the country, Use the tourism teams in the other countries to really get access to who are the tourists? What are they looking like? Who are the competitor destinations? What are the tour operators saying? How many seats can the tour operators take on this flight? These are things that become very important when you build the case. No, not incentives. Incentives comes later. Don't throw the carrot early on, which is, this is how much I have. In another area, there's a whole piece of work called value-based pricing. And the professional services companies, so the consultancies, McKinsey's of the world, etc. There's a belief that when somebody asks for a consultancy study, the first thing that the person does is go to the back of the report and says, how much does it cost? Brave a consultant to say, there's no price. How much are you prepared to pay? How much are you prepared to pay for the benefit of the solution I'm going to give you that the others are not? Don't judge me on price. Judge me on what I'm going to do for you. And that's why I put incentives in the middle. Don't throw incentives as the carrot early on. Build up the story, and then maybe they don't need a revenue guarantee. They don't need marketing support. They don't need landing charges reductions. Sometimes we go with the carrot before we've actually understood what is inside that data. I'm going to jump a little bit because I know we're getting to our what will be your 5 o'clock finish. So just bear with me for 5 more minutes if that's okay. So power of the stakeholder, the community is what we've been saying. Who can we talk to? Governments, yes. Tourism boards fit in there. Development agencies, chambers of commerce, tourist boards or DMOs, hotels and attractions. There's a project being created here in Europe. Some islands off Spain, the Canary Islands. Tenerife was very worried with the pandemic that they were going to lose flights. They had on their islands some very entrepreneurial hoteliers. They got together with the tourist board and created an airline. And they're now flying that airline from source markets back to the destination because they were worried that the types of clients that were starting to come on the new lift were not fitting with those hotels. So you've now got hotels becoming part owners of airlines because this is a hotel group with significant beds in the destination, and they're now part of the story because they see the benefit of the lift. So putting the hotels into the pot is now important as well. And then say you've got hotels and airlines working together. The owners or one of the investors of this new CASA Airlines is a fund in Boston. That fund in Boston is the owner of Sun Country Airlines. Sun Country Airlines is based out of Minneapolis. Sun Country Airlines was created with Las Vegas hoteliers in the past to work together to fulfill the needs of people flying into Vegas to work with hotels. So cut a long story short, you've got hoteliers now very interested investing in airlines because without lift, maybe hotels don't have tourists. And so in the past, hotels were at the end of the ecosystem. You're now putting hotels into the consortium to build the right incentive to talk locally with airlines and airports. Watch this space with hotel groups. So cutting a long story short, create an air service organization. You, the airport, should be owner of that. That's fine. Bring in the DMO, state tourism, bring in the chambers of commerce, whoever you want to bring. Put them at the table, but work together. You need a leader, but then you need the synergies of the group. You can be the leader of the airport, and then you bring your partners with you. The DMO, the state tourism, the chambers of commerce, the private sector, they all become part of this air service organization. And then you go to the airlines with your business case. The airlines will love you for that because you're bringing things. It's not just money anymore. You're bringing insights and you're bringing trust that we need this route. This is not a route just to fulfill a political reason. This is a route that wants partnerships. And that's where you're going to see sustainability. So do you have, throw out to the airports, do you have budget for air service development, or do you put it as part of your existing marketing budget? There's no right or wrong answer. What's important at the moment is to think about where is the future of air service development. Do you use your money? This is coming back to what we've been saying. I don't need to, do you cost subsidy airlines? Do you reduce your taxes, reduce your landing charges to encourage and stimulate? Or do you go the other way and support the demand that will be on the flights that are coming into your airports? It's one or the other. Theoretically, from bottom to top, start with your owned assets. You, the airport, you can offer fees and cost structures to airlines. That's a relationship, a private relationship between an airport and an airline. How are you going to work on volume deals together, etc.? Do you move up the level and bring in paid assets? So you do that with tourism together, with chambers of commerce. You create a marketing fund. So you either reduce costs, you create a marketing fund, which is the middle, or you go for the highest incentive. I wouldn't say it's the best. This idea that you actually remove the risk of an airline. This can be used in very strategic cases where you need, where the sum of the whole is greater than its parts, and you really need to encourage an airline to stimulate. And one airline will then bring others, a little bit like a test to try and get something to really happen. In terms of risk sharing, you the airport, are working on your own if you work in the fee or cost waivers. If you bring in the government support, marketing funds, etc., the private sector, you have a little bit more risk. And when you're working on joint revenue guarantees, which you, the airport, can't do on your own, you need help. Then obviously, yes, you've got stakeholders that are basically offsetting losses of airlines. And if you don't benefit from that, if the tourists don't arrive or the market doesn't come, you've got to justify why you paid the airline's losses. So there's a kind of you've got to have some sort of corporate responsibility with a revenue guarantee strategy. What I'm showing here is, okay, jumping a little bit back. We had 4 types: retain routes, grow routes, new routes with existing, new routes with new. How do you work the different ways? Well, as I said before, if you want to get an airline to fly more, to get an airline to continue to fly what they were doing in 2019, bring it back. Maybe you reduce the fees, you give them a volume deal, and they'll be happy. If you want an airline to grow routes, to increase existing routes, maybe to do more frequencies, maybe you want to increase the capacity, move from a 20 to a 21, etc. Then maybe you say to them, okay, that's more demand. We help you with promotion. We don't need to give you a cost subsidy and promotion, but certainly don't give a revenue guarantee to your existing airlines. These are your partners. Don't pay your existing partners money for things that you're trying to work that also helps them. New routes with existing airlines, promotion, as we've said. New routes with new airlines, maybe that's where you blend marketing and promotion. And in some cases where you really need to stimulate, and a certain airline that you think you need to work with, maybe you then talk a little bit about some risk share on the yield or on the losses that they might have on the route. But it's a kind of trial and error, and as you go through it, you learn more and more. But you've got 3 kind of mechanisms to support the process. There's a lot happening. I just picked out, this came out the other day, an airport I never even knew about in the middle of Mid-America Airport in the middle of America. It's got $100,000 to give to airlines. This is chasing supply. This is revenue guaranteeing, no landing fees for the next 2 years. I mean, I have no idea how the airport's going to make any money. But this is the kind of mindset that this is the worst case scenario. You've got some airports that are just throwing money at airlines. I would imagine airlines say, thank you very much. But as I've said, we're not interested in I don't want to say, if I'm an
Yes, Kevin, you're back. You're on mute, Gavin.
Sorry, I'm not sure what happened. If it was my side, if my system was down. So we're very, very close. So sorry for everybody for that issue. So yeah, what I'm showing here is, how can an airport make any money here? They're prepared to throw 100,000 at a flight and give 2 years of no charges. I think, this is a one-offs, but it's out there. So you're going to start seeing desperate tactics in certain desperate positions of airports. I wouldn't say that this is a good way of doing it. What's more important, and to finish really, is two things. One is you need passengers, the airport. So the air service development, I've talked about helping a community, but let's be honest, it's the way that brings back your multiplier effect and rebuilds your non-aviation revenue. And that's got to be very, very important in all of this discussion. My final slide is, so where are we going? What can we take out of all of this? Business models are changing, as I've said. Lessors are now owners of aircraft. Governments are now owners of airlines. People scrutinizing aviation. So that means airports and the way that you need to talk to airlines, or airlines have to talk with airports in a much more realistic way. And if you can help them to support their stakeholders, their shareholders, by really giving good, robust business cases, that's got to help airlines trying to justify decisions to banks and governments when they're looking at route launches. There's this discussion about hubs and point-to-point. I said in the US during the summer, the big 3 airline companies took a decision to fly point-to-point and remove the importance of Chicago, Atlanta, and Atlanta and Dallas, American, United, and Delta. People have said, what's the future of Emirates, Abu Dhabi, or Emirates and Dubai, Abu Dhabi and Etihad and Qatar and Doha, if point-to-point, A350s, the new model of the 777-10 series that can go further, A321 ultra long ranges going 7 to 11 hours. What we can do is a lot more point-to-point first airports and a lot more point-to-point secondary and third airports, mixing twin aisle and single aisles. Ownership of airlines. I think the jury, we've not seen this. 2020, government stepped in and bailed out airlines. 2021, we thought we were going to get better. It's looking better, but it's still not great on the yields. Have we yet to really see airlines start to buy into each other? Have we really yet to start to see mergers and acquisitions? We haven't seen many airlines go bankrupt in the last 6 months relative to what was happening. What we're actually seeing is more airlines coming in. I've mentioned Breeze and Avalon are 2 that have launched in the US already. I'm seeing Flypop is a new low cost that's created in Iceland. You're talking about Akasa starting next year. You've got Flypop, which is a regional an airline that's doing low cost from North India to the UK, a new what they're calling long haul low cost. So you've got a lot of airline startup development. You've actually got more startups in 2021 than we had in 2019. Is that a reflection that people are seeing or spotting opportunities that the legacy airlines are not going to all survive and kind of jumping in quickly to take some share? Consumer behavior's changing. It's all search now and last minute bookings. It's either book now or book for next year. So that's changing people's potential. And my kind of game changer, and I'm throwing it out to India really, because I'm not seeing 21 long range and ultra long range in the plans compared to the plans of European and US airline companies. Have they seen something that the others haven't seen? Or are they missing something? And as airports, what can you get from this new long-haul narrow-body game-changing opportunity? Connecting secondary airports to primary destinations that you can't bring with twin-aisle aircraft. I will say, can we vote for those who are still left? I will bring up a final poll and then we're finished, which is basically to think, I think it was raised earlier as a question, pretty much as okay, so what might get in the way of all of this? Airports, airlines, communities working together. Airlines will always have the last word. At the end of the day, airlines demand where they go. So thank you very much, but we'll make the decision. Go back to that very early slide, that what is network and what is air service development. Politics or money and politics, the second and third are quite similar. We've got money talks. Airlines will give revenue guarantees. The airlines will take it. Politics at play. I need this route, so please fly it. Or the consumer demand. You don't have reason to travel, so thank you very much. Great work, guys, but we're stuck with a little bit of the same. Give you a bit of time to have a think.
Kevin, as we continue the poll, just to summarize a few questions.
Please.
Probably you can just take time to answer them. First one which comes is low-cost airlines the new way forward, 2022 and above? And second, would the cargo sector be benefiting from this pandemic and be able to grow much better? So these are two questions which are summarized from what the audience wanted to say.
The low-cost sector, of course, it has a huge part to play 2022 onwards. Why? Because, as we said, you highlighted we don't know if this is going to be 23 or 24 or even beyond that in our first poll. What that then means is what happened in 2020 and what's happened in 2021 is that who's been able to make some business during the pandemic has been the low cost, because they've been nimble. They can move fleets around because they're not reliant on the hub project. They're not reliant on one market feeding another market. I'm not reliant on China feeding America. I'm not reliant on America feeding India. So I'm just focused, as long as London and Paris is open, as long as Madrid and Munich is open, I can move my aircraft around. So in the being nimble, low cost will always win, because they can just move aircraft as long as airports are able to take them. So the concept of a low cost, not the strategy of the pricing, the concept of the point-to-point model is probably a better way to put it. This idea that we our aircraft and the way we work our crew as well, we move our crew around. We don't just, it's not stationing things in, it's not, it's always here. No, we're able to pick up and move things. That's going to make the low-cost strategy work if the pandemic, if things don't go so well during the last part of this year and moving into 2022, they will be able to mirror and move things around quickly. The vision of the low cost, it's there to open up markets. And, as we've said, it's matured now. It's gone. Where it's not really got is Africa. So it's gone across, starting in America, went to Europe, it's in Asia. I'm classing India now as Asia. It tried Africa. There was a concept called FastJet. FastJet was a former EasyJet board director, went down to Africa and created a model. They called it FastJet. The African space is completely different to Europe. And the cargo is really important in Africa. And the low-cost airlines were not working with cargo. So straight away, they couldn't do 20-minute turnarounds because the cargo might take 1.5 hours to disembark. So that model of 9-10 hour rotations we showed you on the Syrian data of a low cost should be flying around 9-10 hours a day to be, a single aisle should be flying around 9 or 10 hours. FastJet was getting about 5 hours. So if you've got low fares and you're not optimizing your routes, your hardware, it can't work. And so Africa still hasn't, there's been a couple of startups in South Africa going Cape Town, Joburg, Cape Town, Joburg, Durban, etc., where you've got some critical mass. And Kenya Airways created something called Jambo Jet, which is a concept of a low cost within their full service. But if you think about it, Ethiopian Airlines hasn't created a low cost for Africa to create a Ryanair or EasyJet or a Wizz project. So I think Africa is a little bit underserved in terms of low costs. But I think, yes, it's there to support opening up markets and opening up new potential. I think what has been What's not worked is low cost long haul. And when I'm talking about the 21 long range, that's a different project. Who's failed has been the airlines like Iberia Group, IAG, creating Level, which was supposed to fly to North America with A330s. Norwegian, that was flying A330s from North America to Europe, believing that you could fight the legacy carriers. Legacy carriers on transatlantic are making money at the front of the aircraft, as I said in my presentation. Low-cost airlines are making money on the point-to-point. So you can expand your market size with the long range, but it's not long-haul low-cost. It's a low-cost airline company already low-cost, just expanding where they penetrate. So yes, it has got a part to play. The cargo, I think it's been there. Cargo was always important. And the question, if you talk to people in cargo, they would have said for a long time, cargo always made more money than passengers, but nobody ever listened to us. And so when we offloaded cargo because of passengers and the freight forwarding companies were complaining, the CCO of the airline was okay because cargo may be reported into another part of the business. But of course, airlines were opportunistic using freighters and et cetera. At some point, you've got to, is it normal? Are you a cargo airline or are you a passenger airline? You can't really be both. Michael Porter, in Competitive Advantage in 1980s, wrote a book, or the book was written in the 1980s, where he said, don't get stuck in the middle. Are you a passenger airline? Are you a cargo airline? Yes, you can try a little bit of both. And during the pandemic, we've been cargo because there's no passengers. But let's be honest, moving forward, this is not a strategy. Look at the owner of, again, the owner of Sun Country Airlines I've mentioned. They're the biggest supplier of aircraft to the distribution channels in the US with Amazon. So you're creating, Amazon is probably one of the biggest cargo companies in the world in relation to airlines. In terms of their fleets, they just don't think, they call it Amazon Prime on the back of the aircraft, but they don't own the aircraft. They're on an Acme relationship with Sun Country Airlines and other groups that take Amazon Prime's cargo. But, at what point would it stop Amazon creating a passenger airline or Google creating a passenger airline? Don't be cargo and passenger. Don't get stuck in the middle. It's what I said about FastJet. They thought they could take the low-cost model to Africa, but cargo is part of the strategy. So you can't have a low-cost model if you don't have turnarounds you can't turn around a low-cost plane 1.5 hours. You're losing your block hour contribution. So it's one or the other. So I think use it while you can, but don't think of a vision in the future of building cargo and passenger. What are you? Are you in or are you out? Does that help, Guijo? Just to share the results, basically, 66% of you are with this, or 2/3 of you are with the consumer. You're happy that, the consumers will determine. And that, hopefully that then builds back a little bit about, the airports have to work closely with helping to support the demand, work with the partners, the tourism, etc. So that's it. I apologize. I'm well over time. Hopefully, sorry, I overran a little bit. For those that could stay with us, hopefully it didn't inconvenience you much more. So again, thank you to GMR. Great hosts. Keep up the great work that you're doing in India and wider world with your partnerships and the Academy. It's a great opportunity to share the learning. And that's why we put on this for the community and bring the community together. So very happy to have helped out to Guijo, and thank Guijo for putting this on, and to Rohit for doing the running around, and Parel for her strategic leadership in this project as well.
Yes, thanks a lot, Gavin. Before we end the session, I would like to thank the audience. The audience has been wonderful. They've been quite patient. A lot of questions which have come in. We tried to take all the questions, but as the time progressed and probably we're running out of time, we could not take everyone's questions and views. But I personally feel that we will come back with a stronger topic, with a stronger presentation from Gavin, and we can do something much more better. I will request every one of you who are still there, please share your feedback. Write to us. What kind of topics would you be interested in? And this helps us a lot. This helps us to bring in new ideas, create a new environment, an ecosystem of learning and giving back to society. So once again, thank you audience for being there and supporting us from GMR Aviation Academy. Once again, I look forward to your support for new topics coming up from Gavin and other people we approach to. A big thank you to Rohit, who has been immensely supportive. He has done the groundwork. He has been able to put things in place, all the digital activities running around LinkedIn, social media. So thank you, Rohit, for making this happen. Finally, least but not the one we can probably, as much as I can thank Gavin. I've been running around with Gavin, following up with Gavin since 2 months now. We wanted to put this up for the community. We wanted to give back to the community. We wanted to do something and put in a view which is there from the pandemic and the post-pandemic side. So, Gavin, big thank you to you for making this happen, supporting us at odd times, and putting this in place and making this a wonderful show. Uh, if I can request the audience to switch on their cameras, we can probably take a photo, which will help us to keep this as memories. Thank you all once again. We look back and uh, we would definitely want everyone to be there for our new sessions. Thank you. Thanks a lot.
No, thank you, and good luck to all of you working in the sector. And if you're mainly in India, I think you've turned the corner. There was a very positive message from the GMR CEO at the start. Yeah, things will change for the better, for sure. And say you've got potentially a new airline starting. You've got a new privatization program to be run, and that's got to be good. That will just make change and support change and bring in change. Of course, you've been very, as I said, everybody wanted to know what you were doing. You were kind of under the radar for years, and everybody was looking at China and all India. Right. What's going on over there? Nobody knows really what's going on. It wasn't that you weren't out there. It was so much domestic that nobody was really getting in, and everybody was happy with domestic. And that's right. Got to be one of the questions as you go. China was different. China was very much going out. China outbound was massive, and India outbound was minimal. It was big, but it was very diaspora and related with work rather than related with what will be this new middle-class tourist. And right. that's a huge, the European cities were desperate for the Chinese, and they started now look at what will be the Indian middle class coming in the next 5 to 10 years. How do we need to adapt and get our destinations ready for the Indian middle class?
Right. Once again, thanks a lot to you, Gavin. And we would reconnect with you. We will definitely work together for new topics, and we will evolve. And probably we'll keep back to the society. We'll make it a learning habitat to be with there. Thanks again, everyone, and we look forward to continued support. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kijo. I will now leave you. I'll leave you as well.
Thank you very much for your time. Thank you, Gavin.
I'll go and get my lunch, and we'll keep in touch in the next weeks. And feel free to share the slides. No problem with that.
We'll do so. Thank you.
Great. Any feedback you get later, just forward on to me as well. Thank you. Thank you very much, Rohit, as well. And
yeah, thank you. Thank you, Professor, for your kind support. Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.